All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Laura Rogers, and this is Power Hour. Today's topic is going to be how to work with groups of people in flows, when you're creating flows in Power Automate, and you need to send something to a group of people or do approvals for a group of people. Let's kick it off. All right, so again, I'm Laura Rogers, and this is our weekly show we do Wednesdays at 11 Central. Joelle is here too. She's usually on the camera. She's in the chat today, so she's going to be kind of helping, talk through the questions and things like that. And we are just going to do a live demo. You never know what will happen. So this is, if it's your first time joining, this is a live show, and the fun about it is that we have a chat, we have questions the whole time, we can discuss things, and we just demo things that you can do in Microsoft 365. Not super technical things. I'm not a programmer. I don't write code or anything. So it's really geared towards business users and like power user type of people. So let's get started. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so here is Power Automate. So when you're working in Power Automate, each workflow that you create is called a flow. So the product itself used to be called Microsoft Flow. They changed it to Power Automate, but the flows are still called flows. So when we're working with flows and we need to do something with a group of people, there are kind of some tricky things to know about, especially because different types of groups of people have different ways, different methods that you have to use to be able to do things with them. So I'll go ahead and start building a flow. And what I'll do is I just created, now if you're in this tenant, you can get to this expense tracker list. I just created this list, and I'm going to base my flow off of items in this list needing approval. So what I'm going to do is I'll just create the trigger for this I'll just make it be a manual trigger. And then that way we can test this and kind of manually trigger it and say, all right, so here's an expense. I want to send an email to a group of people or send an approval to a group of people. We'll start off with email. And then the concept that you'll learn about having to have a list of people it's going to apply to a lot of different things in flows. So it's going to apply to sending an email, to sending an approval, sending a notification, sending any kind of email connector that you find in flows, any kind of list of where you're putting someone in a to box and sending something to them. All right, so here's my list. And to quickly create a list that I can manually trigger, I'm going to go to Power Automate here and click Create a Flow. And I'll zoom into, let me see. Cool. And then what I like to do is if you want to play around with these templates and just kind of see what they do, that's always fun. But I'm just going to say complete a custom action for the selected item. And that is going to give me a flow. It's going to create a flow, and it's going to have a trigger for SharePoint. So it's going to have a for a selected item trigger. And then once I select an item and kick off the flow, then it gets that item, and then I can just build the rest of the flow to make it do whatever I want. So the first kind of group, so let me kind of ask people in the chat and see kind of what you all think about this. When you're working with groups of people in flows, what is the main type of group that you struggle with, that you might need to that you use the most often? Let's kind of see what everybody thinks. I'll go ahead and, you know what I'm going to start with? I'm going to start with SharePoint groups, because SharePoint groups it's in your SharePoint site. SharePoint groups are something that they're kind of gotten buried down over the years, because it's really easy to create a Microsoft 365 group and add members to it. But the old way that we used to, the classic way of creating groups of people was just to go in and create SharePoint groups and give the different groups of people different permissions in your site. Now you can still do that, and you can still use those groups of people for permissions, and you can use those groups of people to send email in a flow or assign things to people. It's just kind of tricky to get there because in Microsoft's trying to make permissions more simple, they've kind of tucked away the old SharePoint groups and tried to simplify it by creating just a concept of members of a Microsoft 365 group and owners. But you can still do it the old way. So let's go, the trick to get to it is to go to Site Permissions. Now you do have to be a site owner to do this, and go to Advanced Permission Settings. So I'll just say, so I have these groups here. I'm going to click on the name of just one of these default groups. And this is a pretty new site. I just created it a couple of weeks ago. So when you do that, then you're in this sort of interface here where you have the list of groups down the left side. And then look, I can click groups here. And then that's where I can see the list of all the groups in my site. And let's see, I do have, see, I've got everyone in there. I've got everyone except external users. So I've got, these are like all the default groups pretty much, but I can create a new group here. So I'll just create a new group and I'll call it expense managers. And this will just be like for the people that are in charge of expenses. And when I add the group owner here, what I like to do is I like to, instead of just putting myself, leaving myself as the owner of the group, I actually like to put the owners group of the SharePoint site as the owner of this new group, so that I am not the only one that can manage it. And also anyone that's a site collection owner will be able to manage the groups. When you create a group, you don't need to check any of these boxes down here. Those are going to be for the purpose of giving people permissions to things. I'm creating this group really just for the purpose of, right now, of sending an email to these people. And then I could use this group to go give people different levels of permissions in different lists and libraries on my site. We actually have a whole other Power Hour we did about SharePoint permissions where I kind of dig into all that. So I'll go ahead and click Create. And then it automatically puts me in the group. And then I'll go ahead and create another one. And I'll call it, let's see, Expense Approvers. And then, let's see, Power Hour Owners is going to be the owner. And I always put everyone here. Everyone ensures that you'll be able to, everyone will be able to have access to this. So in the past with SharePoint Designer workflows, if you needed to do something with people in a group, you had to put everyone here so that when the workflow would run, it would be able to recognize the group. So that's just a habit that I've gotten into where I always just say that I want everyone to be able to view who's in the group. And I'll just say I want Joelle to be in here too. And I always uncheck this box so it doesn't send them an invitation because those are pretty annoying. Okay, so now I have my groups that I've created. So Power Automate, so flows don't recognize SharePoint groups. So that's why we're starting off with the absolute trickiest way to do flows. So what we have to do is we have to use an HTTPS web service call to SharePoint to be able, in the flow, to be able to get a hold of, what the groups are, who the members are, anything you want to do with, anything having to do with the group, because there isn't just a built-in action to do it. So here's that, let's see, that's the wrong tenant. Oh yeah, this is the right one. Okay, so here is my tenant, and let me go ahead and refresh this. Since I started creating a flow right here. So I'm going to call this expense test email. So since I'm starting off with sending an email to people, and then we'll work our way to approvals. So this is just basically going to kick off when someone manually triggers it from one of these expense items. And I want to go get, so for our first example, We're going to say we want to go get the list of people in that that certain group. We go back to the groups, and it was called, it's a lot of clicks, right? It was called expense managers. So I'm just going to send, and I just wanted to send an email to everyone in the expense managers group. All right, so let's see. Again, let me close that one. Okay, so if I, the first thing I have to do is go do that, use that web service call. So it's called send an HTTP request to SharePoint. And then that's, I have to pick which site it is, which is just going to be the Power Hour site. And then I'm using a method of get. And if you're in my current training class, the Power Automate Advanced class, this is in a slide. It's in, I go over this in that course. And so all this syntax is in a slide in there. But this is not super secret. You could find this on the web anywhere. So I'm going to take this syntax that they give us, and I'm just going to put my name of my group, and I'm calling it Expense Managers. That's what I called it. Let me double check. Yeah, Expense Managers. So I'm just typing the name of the group in this little, I'll go ahead and paste that in the chat. See if you all can see it. If I can find the chat. That's the syntax. All right. And then it's just get, and then I'm getting that. And then that's going to get all the people in the group. But then I have to do a parse JSON action. So the pain about doing a parse JSON action is that you actually have to run this first to be able to get the syntax of the JSON that you're parsing. And we're parsing it. The whole reason that we're parsing it down with the parse JSON action is because it's hard to get to that data without parsing it out. So if I try to go just send an email, I'll just show you why real quick. If I just try to go send an email, and so it's creating my connector for me. And I go to the to box, and I'm trying to pick someone to send it to. See, it doesn't have, notice it doesn't have like an email address or something simple here. It just has this big blob of information. So I'm going to go ahead and run this flow. Let me delete this. I'm going to run it just to be able to get this syntax to be able to do the parse JSON. So to kick off this flow, I'm going to go to my expense tracker. And I added the flow to it. So let me just refresh this. And let's see. And you all let me know, like while I'm doing this, I'm doing SharePoint groups first, but this could take probably at least half of Power Hour. But let me know what other kind of groups you want to do. I will cover Microsoft 365 groups next, probably, unless you tell me otherwise. All right. Automate. And then this takes a second sometimes. See how it took a second to kind of show me what all the flows are? This is the flow that I just created, the expense test email. So I'm going to kick that off. And I didn't create any initiation parameters in this flow. So it's just going to basically have a button to run the flow. We did a different Power Hour where we teach you how to create a nice little pretty button in your list to kick off the flow. So that's the way I just did it was the long way, just because that's just the sort of default out of the box way. Kevin, yes, you're in the right chat. It is the old one, but everyone's in the old chat right now. So yeah, I think Joelle and I are the only ones in the new chat. But so yeah, you're in the right one. Okay, so it kicked off. So let's go look. I was kind of stalling because sometimes they take a minute to kick off. All right, so it succeeded. So this is what we need. We need to get that JSON syntax. So we sent an HTTP request to SharePoint. We need this thing. So we just take this whole body and copy that to the clipboard and then edit the flow. And you have to do this every time you need to do a parse JSON action. And here it is, parse JSON. And the content is going to be the body of what this send an HTTP request to SharePoint. Now, I probably should give that a better name. I should say like get expense managers there. I used to completely change the names of these actions, and then I came to the realization that sometimes it's kind of tricky to remember what the action was called in the first place. You can go to the little information thing and find out, but anyway, sometimes, so I just like to leave the name of what it was originally called and then just add onto the end of it just when I'm naming things in here. All right, so then it did rename that correctly. So now I have to choose generate from sample and paste my payload in here. And that's the thing I just copied to my clipboard and save that. And then I'll show you what it does. Then I want to send an email, Office 365 Outlook. I go to this little dynamic button that lets me see my dynamic information here. And I can see that it's got the email here. So it is already showing me, it's narrowed down to only show me fields that have people's email so I can pick from. I could click see more and I can see all this stuff, but email is really the one I want anyway. Now watch what happens. It's going to find potentially multiple people in that SharePoint group. So watch what happens when I click email. It put it in a loop. So if you just let it put it in a loop like this, is just obviously what it does by default, then what you're going to get is separate emails to each person in the group. You may want that might be the behavior that you're after, but you may want to just have one email that goes to all the people so they can all see each other's names in the to box of that one email. And then that way they could potentially reply all and things like that, and they'd be able to see the other people that it's being sent to. So here's what I'm going to do. Instead of doing this whole loop thing, I'll just pull it back out of the loop and delete the loop. Always just be aware when a loop appears, if that's what you want it to be doing, and then the fact that when something becomes part of a loop, that it's going to do that action multiple times. So in order to have a list of people in this to box, what do you do when you're sending an email? You put an email address and a semicolon, email address, semicolon. So that's the structure that we want to put all those people's names. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a string of text variable, and then I'm going to append to that string of text for each person. So I'll just initialize a variable here. And I'm going to call it var expense, what did I call it? Expense managers string, and then be sure and make it a string variable. So I'm initializing the variable for expense managers. And then once it parses the JSON and gets those email addresses, then that's when I need to go append all those people's email addresses to one big long string. So I'll go append, and I'm going to, not an array variable, I'm going to append to a string variable. I want a single string of text that's just got email addresses with semicolons in between them. So I'll say I want to append to the var expense manager string, and then what is the data? I want that email address from the Parse JSON. So now notice that does get put in a loop, but that's fine because I want it to loop through each person's email and append them to a string. And then not only just to put a bunch of email addresses in a row, I want it to put a semicolon after so that it puts it in between each person's email. Make sense? Okay, is anybody in this chat, anybody ever tried this before? Okay. So then once I have a string of text, then I'll be able to, when I go to the to box, go to this little dynamic button here, I'll be able to put my variable here. Now, be sure that you're not putting a semicolon at the end right here where my cursor is, because if you do that, then it's already going to have a semicolon at the end of the last person here. So you don't want to, if it sees two semicolons in a row, it gets confused and sends you an error. So I put them in the to box. I'll just say check out this expense, and then I'll just put like the ID of it. I don't know, And that's the ID of the item that I selected, basically. And then expense title. And then you can put just basically all of the information about the expense in the email, whatever you want to tell them about it, right? Oh, Steve says I use this all the time. And yeah, Lisa says, yep, still have the scars. This is way more painful than you expected, right? So then I'm saving that. And we'll go ahead and run that, and then we'll go ahead and add approvals to, and we'll just probably just add it to the same flow just for expediency. Okay, so I'm gonna go to my expense tracker, go here, and then I could really just resubmit the flow that I already triggered, just rerun it, but I'm gonna go ahead and re-trigger it, expense test email, and click continue and run. Okay, so there it kicked off. Again, it takes a few seconds sometimes. Let's see. It is a little faster when we do it, we manually trigger it like that, which is why I created a manual trigger instead of just waiting, like when the item's created or modified, having one of those just take sometimes a minute or two. Okay, so this one ran and it sent an email. Let's see if I got my little fake email here. Okay, yeah, here it is. Check out this expense. Now, I am the only one in this group of expense managers that I created. I'm going to do one in a second for expense approvers, and I put a couple of people in that group, but this is it did send the email, and it did, it sent it to me. You could see that it put my name in here with a semicolon. Let's see if I can run it again. I can just go add somebody else to this group. And let's see. Who else is in here that I can add? I'm trying to think of, I've got, yeah, I've got a bunch of test users that we've added to this, but I'm not sure off the top of my head somebody's email address, because we don't have as many email addresses in this one. I just have to add somebody else. Oh, I added Joelle to the other one, so I was thinking that I could just add someone else to this one. But I also want to make sure it's somebody that's in here that's not going to be like, what in the heck is this email? So, all right, I'll just add Joelle to that one. Just keep it simple. I was going around trying to look for somebody else just to give an example of having different other people in here since I added Joelle to the other one, but we'll just keep it simple and do that. Okay, so then I ran this one. Then all I have to do is hit resubmit. And because the flow ran fine, but now I just changed who's in the group. Ooh, let's see what happens. It's parsing the JSON. Oh, expected object, but got null. Maybe my error is because I just tried to rerun. Let me just do one from scratch. I don't want to mess up the structure of it. Now, also, what could have happened, this actually happened to me the other day with one of these, is that when I generated the syntax for that parse JSON, I only had one person in the group, but when I added multiple people to it, the syntax for the parse JSON, it actually changed. So that might be what just happened. So we'll go check. We'll just go run it, and we might have to just re-add that code because there's a different structure in the JSON code if you have one person versus multiple. So it probably, let's see if we'll have an error again. Yeah, so let's go get that new syntax. So I go to the flow that ran already. And you shouldn't have to do this multiple times. It's just basically one versus many people in the group. So I'll go and grab this and copy that and then go edit my flow again. Fun troubleshooting with Laura. And then in my parse JSON, I need to generate, use a different payload to generate and save that. So let's go run that one more time, and then it should send the email to both of us. I'm glad we tried that out and put multiple people in the group. And go. yeah, Lisa still has the scars from trying to do, yeah, this is so painful. It's ridiculous how painful this is. Oh, what is that? That is a new one. I've never seen that error before. That's awesome. Maybe if I just rerun it, it'll be okay. Okay, so I'm going to take this one that failed, and now I've changed the flow, so I'm going to resubmit it and see if that fixes it. Yeah, troubleshooting is great. Nothing works the first time, especially when I'm doing a live show. So, okay, so that one worked. It sent an email. Look at that. See, it concatenated our names together. So when it went through to apply to append the string variable, it put Joelle here, and then it put me here, and then it appended us all together in one big long string with a semicolon in between our names. And then when I got the email, you can see that it goes to both of us. So that's what I was really trying to demonstrate there. So now let's do an approval, and I'm going to, I want to use this same flow because I have all this, like the JSON syntax and all that in here already. But I do want to go ahead and just create a different flow, but I'm just going to save as, and I'm going to just take this whole flow and just make some changes to it so that I can have a separate flow for approvals, but I don't have to redo all that work I just did. So I'll just do save as, and this one's going to be expense approval. And now I go back to flows. Now expense approval is the one I just copied and made a new one. It's going to be grayed out by default. So I go turn it on and then edit it. So this is where I'm going to put the approvers list. So this is going to be expense approvers right here. That's the name of it. So I'll go in here and change it to expense approvers. And then I could just change the name like that. And then it's going to parse the JSON, which is, I don't have to change that. Good. And then for each one, it's going to append them to a string variable. I could change the name of the variable. I'm not going to go through that process. I'm just going to leave it what I called it. And then it's also going to create a string of people. And then this time I'm not doing an email. I'm going to do an approval. So I'll just do start and wait for an approval. It's the most common one. It's creating my connector for me. And then what do you want? Okay, so this is the big decision to make when you are gathering requirements and you're building your approval process. If you're using this approvals action, is do you want everyone? Do I want everyone in this group of approvers to have to approve this expense? Or do I want just the first person to respond to be the one to approve it? And I'll just say, for this one, I'll just say the first to respond is going to approve it. Click first to respond. And then, so I already created this string of email addresses. So now I want to, when I'm assigning it to people, I'm going to use this string. And so this is just like putting it in the to box, except look at this. It puts this semicolon here. See where my cursor is? You have to delete that, and then it's going to put it back. And then I have to delete it again. So I'll just say approve expense, blah, blah, blah. Let's see, what was the title of that? I'll just say, oops. I'll put the date and the title. And then please check this out. And then for the item link, there is a little built-in thing called link to item that you can use. And for the item description, I like to just use the title of the item. It's just a fast way to do it. And then for the requester, I always like to modify this. And in this case, I just want it to be whoever kicks off the flow. So it's for a selected item, and this is going to be the email address of the person who triggered the flow manually. And that way it's going to show them as the requester. All right, so let's go ahead and save that. So that should send it to approvers, and me and Joelle are the approvers. So there we are. And then, so it says, no Microsoft Dataverse database for the environment has been provisioned. Run this approval flow to initiate provisioning. Oh, nice. It's a brand new tenant, so it's never, it's never created a data. So, okay, let me go ahead and kick it off, and then I'll explain what that means. Let's refresh that. Expense approval. I guess I don't deal with brand new tenants very often, so I'm not used to having that message. Okay, so this is a brand new tenant. So the approvals, when you use the approvals action, it actually is a database in Dataverse for the approvals. And then that's where kind of behind the scenes, that's where it keeps track of them. You don't typically have to go try and tap into that information if you're just doing simple approvals, but that's where it stores the data. So since this is a brand new tenant and I'm using this approvals action for the first time, it's saying that, okay, well, there's not even a database yet. So hold on while we create the database behind the scenes. So it said that I had to kick off the flow then for the database to get created. I'm not sure how long that's going to take. Hopefully it won't be too long, but I'll go check this out. Okay, it looks like it's running. So let me see. Let's go see what it's doing. Once it runs and starts the approvals. Now the thing about the way I just put this approval in here, Joelle, see if that went to you, by the way. The thing about this is it's just going to take all the people in that list and it's just going to send it to them all just in whatever order it finds them, probably alphabetically in that SharePoint group. So it's just going to send it to them all together. When you have an out-of-the-box approval action like this, it doesn't have like a certain, like this person, then this person, then this person. It's just going to send it to all of them. So, and there isn't a way necessarily to delineate just any kind of order of people if you just send this to a whole group of people. So let's go see if it actually sent it yet. It would send it to both of us. So yeah, it's just going to take a few minutes because it hasn't created that database. So since I'm not sure how long it takes for that database to get created behind the scenes, since this is the approvals action, we'll go ahead and move on to working with another kind of group. So the next kind of group that I want to cover here is a Microsoft 365 group. So I've created some Microsoft 365 groups in my tenant here. So I've got active teams and groups here. So I've got, and again, it's a brand new tenant, so just have a couple of groups. I created a group called Human Resources, and I put a couple of people in it, and then we can't do this with distribution lists. So distribution lists you can't necessarily use in a flow. So I created the other kind of group I have that exists is an email-enabled AD group. So I'm going to go ahead and use this Human Resources Microsoft 365 group to do the next one. So in here, I'll go ahead and do a new flow. I'm going to copy this one, do save as. Expense approval M365 group. And then this one, I don't have to do all that parse JSON and all that stuff. Turn it on. Now be careful when you're copying a flow and then turning it on if it's got a trigger of something being created or modified, because it could immediately get triggered when you do that. So kind of pay attention to that. Don't just turn it on willy-nilly. Okay, so I don't need this I don't need the JSON. I don't need the HTTP. I do need to still use that same concept of getting the people's email addresses from the group and putting them in a string of separated by semicolons. So I'm still going to leave that concept in here. I'm just going to leave this variable that I initialized and leave the apply to each. Actually, I'll take out the apply to each because it's going to be looping through a different list of stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and use this action. So when you're dealing with Microsoft 365 groups, it's actually called Office 365 groups in here. They haven't renamed it to call it Microsoft 365 groups, but that's what it is. And it's going to be list group members. So when I'm listing the group members, all I have to have is the name of the group. So here's that human resources group that you saw that I was referring to. And it just, if I want to narrow it down to a smaller number of people, I could. I only have one or two people in the group. So I'm going to list the group members, and then I want to start an approval. So let's go see what this, well, we'll see what it looks like. We'll see what this raw data looks like when we run the flow. But what we need to do, we still need to do that append variable. So append to string variable. And I'm just going to use that same string that I created. And this time the value is going to be this data from the group members. It's going to be their email address right here. So it's going to append to the string variable, and it's going to use their email address. Don't forget to put a semicolon in here. And then I'm just going to send my approval to that variable. So same exact thing. And it's just, and again, this approval action just sends the approval to everyone in the group. This built-in action doesn't have stages of one person after the next, after the next. Now I will try this out. And I'll probably get an email in here once that other flow finally runs, once that approvals database gets created. Oh, yeah, there it is. That's funny. That took a second. So I'll approve that. And Joelle probably got it too. And it will have run. So then this new flow that I just created will be able to run too. So I'm going to go back to my list, and now I'm going to run this third flow that I created that's going to use the Microsoft 365 group. Go to automate, go to expense approval M365 group, and I keep adding new connectors. So when you add new connectors to Flow, it has that little extra dialog box telling you that it's using your sign-in for these other connectors. So then I went ahead and ran it. So let's see. Let's go look at that raw data. Okay, so what does it look like when I list the group members? So this is basically the members group. I only put one person in. I put me as the owner, and I put Brenda as a member of the group. So it does not send itself to the owners of the group when I use the list group members action. So it puts all the members in there, and it appends them to this string, which is just one person, and then it sent this approval to Brenda. Now, if I don't want that approval to go to her, see, sent to, I can actually cancel this if I want to, since I'm just testing this and I don't want her to be confused. All right, so then what I can do is let's go look at what those actions were again real quick. I'll go to my flows. Any questions? I'm not sure. Let's see. Okay, no, none in there. Cool. What do y'all think so far? Corey says this is the best time. Probably enjoying my troubleshooting. It's real fun. So also let's just go kind of look at what else you can do with Microsoft 365 groups. Office 365 groups is what they used to be called. I can add members. I even have events. There's a calendar with a Microsoft 365 group, so I can delete events. I can remove somebody. That one's got its own HTTP request concept, update a group event, create group members, list groups I own and belong to, list my own groups, and list my own groups version 2. So that's where you're going to be able to see. Now, if you want yourself, if you're an owner of the group and you want to be part of this action that's sending an approval to all the members, you just need to also put yourself as a member in there. There isn't an action that just says list group owners. It's like list my own owned groups, but it's not owners of a specific group, right? Okay, so those are just some examples of some of the actions that you can use in here. And then there's one more. There is an email-enabled AD group. So let's go see what that one looks like. And I'm just going to go ahead and just do what I've been doing. I'll just create another flow, expense approval, AD group. I don't want to mash them all together into one flow and make it confusing. Lisa says our entire intranet is based on SharePoint groups. Is it worthwhile to change the Microsoft 365 groups? Once you go to that flat structure and you're not using subsites anymore and everything is a site collection, which is either a team site or a communication site, then inherently each team site is going to be a Microsoft 365 group, Lisa. And it's up to you kind of with your communication sites if you need to use SharePoint groups for any like specific permissions within them. Usually communication sites are just one way everybody can read it and then a few people are editing it. So they're not typically that convoluted with permissions. Okay, so this is the M365 group one. Here's my AD group. I'll turn that one on. And let's look at that action. So I'm going to take out that one and that one and look at, there's something tricky that you have to do with Active Directory groups. Where is it? AD. Oh, they renamed it Intra. I wonder if they already, no, they didn't rename the action. Okay, so I go to Azure AD. When you use the Azure AD action in your flow, this is really important. Not everybody has permissions to Azure AD. So only admins are going to be able to authenticate to this connector to be able to run the flow. So there's something extra tricky that you have to do. So I'm going to go ahead and get group members. And I need to know the group ID. So I need to know the group ID of this group that I created. Let's go to, this is my email enabled security group called Information Technology. Let's see if I can get the ID. I think the ID is probably this thing up here in my URL. It's got like a /3 at the end of it. I don't think that's part of the ID. I'll just grab that and put that in there. So that's a little messier, right? So I get the group members and then I want to see what that data looks like. So I gave it the group ID, but I'm just going to try running this and see what happens. I know this is going to error out down here because it doesn't have any people in that variable yet. But I'll go ahead and try this. Automate, look at all those. Expense approval AD group. Yes, only AD tenant people can have access to this action at all, Steve. So I'll show you what extra that you have to do in here. I'm just going to test it and see if it gets the group members first, and then I'll show you that little extra thing that I was referring to. Remember I mentioned that it was going to fail because it doesn't have anybody to send the action to, the approval to. So group members. So it is showing me, I put 2 group members in here. I put Brenda and Joelle. So that is my raw data. So I do have the group members. So then what you have to do when you want to use this AD, you can only use this in a flow that's being manually triggered. So because you have to be able to give it a different, basically impersonating you, the admin, when the flow runs. So I have to go down here for Azure AD. And since I'm the admin, I have to say use this connection, and it's basically my email address because I do have access to AD. And then so anyone that runs this flow, like this SharePoint connector is going to run just as the person kicking off the flow. This approval is going to run as that person, but then I go to the Azure AD one and I change it to run as me, the admin, because end users aren't going to be able to. And unfortunately, this action that exists, that setting that I showed you, only exists for the manually triggered flows. So anything that's manually triggered, not triggered when someone, automatically when someone creates an item or edits an item. So let's go ahead and I'll go edit that. Now that we looked at the raw data, we saw that it was in there. And then I can go do the append to string again. Go to my variables, append to a string variable. There's my string variable. And then I'm going to get that group member mail. So this is the email address of the user. It's not going to let you send an approval to the whole group, just the email for the group. So that's why I'm getting the people in the group and I'm putting a semicolon. Don't forget the semicolon. And then I'm sending the approval to those people. So I'll go ahead and save that. And try it out. I'll just go to the one that failed and I'll just rerun that. And magic. Look at that. So it got the group members. It's appending them to the variable. Oh, and then it errored out again. Let's see. Let's see what the error is. Invalid approval requester. Oh, okay. So that's going to be the person that I was putting as the requester was the person kicking off the flow. But let me go ahead and I'm just going to manually, sometimes some of these errors that you get are just happening because you're just rerunning an old flow multiple times, a failed flow. So let's just see if this one, I'm just going to get this one to run just from scratch. That's usually my first troubleshooting step, is to just run it from scratch and not just rerun a failed one or an old one. Okay, so it reran. And let me see. It says running. Okay, it did not error this time when it got to start and wait for an approval. So you can't really see what's in here, what it's doing, but I know that Joelle and Brenda were the two members of that group. So if I go to approvals, since I set myself as the requester and in that approval action, the person who kicks off the flow is the requester, then that person can go in here and see and sent items. And I can see it was sent to Brenda Cox and Joelle Jobson. And then this is the thing it sent them. Now, I can't go in and approve it for them. I can just go cancel it. But that's how you can tap into those groups of people. All right. Any other types of, we talked about how to tap into the members of 3 different types of groups. Do y'all have anything else specific that you're trying to do with flows, with groups of people that's kind of tricky? One thing that I'll just kind of start talking about, another concept that I use commonly while I'm waiting to see if anybody has any questions in here. One thing that people like to do is they like to have the flow go to like an approval, go to the first one and then the second person, and like go to certain people in an order. One thing that you can do, one way to do that, and I think I even kind of talked about this way doing something else in a different demo last week, is the concept of having a SharePoint list that you create and you just call it roles, and you just have your flow, you just define different roles of people and who they are, and you have your flow just go look at that SharePoint list to get the people. Because if it's just getting a whole group of people, the flow is not going to send it to them in a certain order. It's just going to get all the people, and that approval action doesn't have stages. It just sends it to everyone. So if you want to have, I'll see if I can whip this up in 10 minutes real quick. I'll just create a new list, blank list, and I'll call it roles. And this concept can be used in Power Apps and flows and just a lot of different business solutions that you build. This is a roles list, is something that I build all the time. And unfortunately, when you put people in a SharePoint group, you can use it in a flow, and you can also give that group of people permissions to different things in that site. But with roles, you're just basically just creating a list with people's names and what role they have. So it can't also be used for permissions like a SharePoint group can be. So you definitely have give and take for both of these. So I'll just say the title, I'll just leave that as title. That'll just be the name of the role. And then I'll add a column and I'll make it be a person. And that will be the, I'll just call it person. It's going to be the name of the role and the person and the role. And I like to leave it to one person per people picker. And that way I can just have, even if I have multiple people in the same role, I can just add multiple list items. So I'll just call this role approver 1, and that's going to be me. And I don't need a lot of things. This is like a pet peeve of mine. I don't need attachments in this list that I created. So when I don't need attachments, I don't need to see it there. I just disable attachments real quick. OCD. Okay, let's see. Okay, so that's me. I'm approver 1. Put approver 2, and that's also going to be me, just so I can quickly get through this demo. And then approver 3, or sometimes approver 3 is actually like the CEO or something like that, right? So now I can tap into this list with my flow. So I'll do another flow. I know, right? I'm going to kick off this flow. Let's see, which one do I want to copy? I'll just grab that one to save as. Expense approval tiers. I'll just call it, or stages, like that. And I'll turn that one on. That same item, that same expense is the one that's going to get all these different flows run on it, right? Okay. Okay, so I'm not using my Azure connector here. I am going to go get, so what I want is I want that first approver. So I'll just say, let me get rid of this apply to each. Just want to get one approver. Now, the way that I have to do this is I'll do get SharePoint get. Now, when I'm getting, I really just want, in my case, I just have one approver. I just have one item. I would think that I would just use the get item action. You can only use the get item action if you know the ID. And I don't necessarily know, I mean, obviously it's ID 1 because I just created it a minute ago, but what I want to do is I want to query that list and just query it for approver 1 and get whoever's names are in there that have approver 1 as the name of the role. So I have to use get items. Get item is only if you know the ID. I'll just use get items. And then I'll go ahead and go to my Power Hour and go to my list called roles. And then I need to, what I want to do is I only want to get that specific role. I just want approver 1 first. I want to know who is approver 1. So in order to do that, I need the system name. So this one's easy. The system name is just title. I can see that by the name of the column. And when I go to here, I can see in the URL it says field equals title. So that's how I know the system name. And so I take the system name and I say title EQ for equals, and I'll just type approver 1. I think that's what I called it. Title equals approver 1. And that's going to return me just that one person or anyone in the list that has approver 1 in that title column. But since it's the get items action, it automatically is going to put it in a loop. So I'm still going to do that same concept of appending to a string variable and just getting potentially one or more, getting their email addresses into a string for approvers. So I'm going to call this var approver 1. And then I might have multiple levels of approval. Approval 1. And I got to stop in a minute. Then I'm going to go to my variables and append to the string variable. Are you seeing a pattern here? So then I have my var approver 1, and then it's going to be by my dynamic content of that column that I called just person. And I want the person's email. This is the specific piece of data that I want. I want their email address. And then remember, I always need to remember to put a semicolon here so that it appends them and puts a semicolon. It's not going to hurt if it's just one person, but with get items action, it's always going to put it in a loop. So then I have this var approver 1. So then that can be that first approver is verapprover 1. So then what I'd have to do is do another step, condition, and say if the outcome is equal to approve, if that approver 1 approves it, then I have to do another variable for approver 2. I have to go get items and get the title equals approver 2. And then I have to apply to each, and I have to append to that string variable for approver 2. So to do all those exact things, I can even copy these actions to my clipboard and just reuse them. So I have to do all those things and then do another approval and have it go down the if yes path, and then it would go to approver 2. And then if yes, it would go to approver 3 or CEO, whoever your third approver is. So that's the pattern that you're going to use if you want to build, and this is just one way to build it in stages like this. All right, any last questions? That was a whirlwind, right? I think y'all can kind of see the pattern that I'm getting at with this whole trick around appending things to a string variable, appending those email addresses, and you can kind of understand why it puts them in loops and to kind of look out for that. And decide if you want them to be in a loop or not, and then kind of go from there and be able to use these tools when you're building your emails and approval processes in your flows. All right, let me flip back over to the other camera. Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming to Power Hour. Again, you can go to iwmentor.com and click schedule to see when the next Power Hours are going to be held. Also, I'm going to be speaking at the big Microsoft Power Platform Conference in October. It's October 3rd through 5th, and that's in Las Vegas. So hopefully I'll see a bunch of you there and come to my sessions. And everybody have a good rest of your week.